Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking, they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. Alexander Parker Crittenden was many things, but mostly he was a liar. Born into the well-respected Kentucky Crittenden clan, he'd left Lexington early on and seemed to be on the move ever since. He wasn't evil, or maybe he was, but he wasn't like serial killer bad or child molester bad. He was just a liar, who lied not pathologically or to excess, but almost exclusively to two women, both of whom he purportedly loved. One was his wife, Clara, with whom he fathered 14 children, though sadly only 8 would survive into adulthood. The other was his mistress, Laura Fair, with whom he shared 7 years of intermittent cohabitation and a good helping of drama. The two women had a few things in common, beside the man most people knew as AP. They were both deeply rooted in their Southern heritage, women who grew up with the rules, mores, and strictures that being female and living in the heart of the 19th century required. Clara didn't chafe against those rules. Laura did. Both believed that they knew AP's true nature. Both believed he loved them with every fiber in his body, and both were inordinately patient with him, all facts considered. But, like I said, he wasn't much for telling either of them the truth. So it was that on September 3rd, 1870, AP met his beloved Laura privately to reassure her just moments before he was scheduled to rendezvous with his wife and 4 of their children in Oakland, just across the bay. They'd been away from him and their California home in San Francisco for 6 months, visiting relatives in Virginia. AP had told Laura he had sent them away from California because the marriage was over. He told Laura that the divorce from Clara was imminent now. He told Laura that she was his only true wife. This was an all too familiar refrain. He'd employed that exact true wife terminology with her before, convincing Laura that God had meant for them to be together, that the heavens had predetermined their union even before they'd been born, that God had married them before they even existed. It wasn't exactly original, but it must have sounded mighty romantic to Laura. Claire then had been, well, a detour of sorts. A long detour, one that lasted 32 years. AP notably said to Laura, "I kiss no other," just before he hurried off to meet his returning family. But Laura wasn't sure of anything now. So, as tired as she was that day, she hadn't been sleeping much, she followed him. She ran to board the same ferry he did, going toward Oakland, careful that he could not see her. She stayed out of sight during the trip across the bay. AP disembarked, but Laura held back to watch the reunion at the train station. In Carol Haber's book, The Trials of Laura Fair, narrator Pam Ward reads this passage.
As she ran through the decks of the ferry, Laura was convinced that the key to her future lay in observing Crittenden as he greeted Clara as she debarked from the train. Would she see a man who was only playing the role of the dutiful husband? Or would she view a warm and contented husband who, regardless of years of promises, had never had any intention of leaving his wife?
What happened next would mesmerize a nation, challenge legal precedent, and introduce a medical debate that still lingers. All of this because 3 people were locked in a triangle made by one man's exhortations, promises, and lies. Only 2 would live to see it all unravel. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Cornbread Hemp. Coming back from a week in California was great, but wow, jumping back into the grind hits hard.
Yeah, that first week back always feels like a crash landing.
That's when I've really appreciated Cornbread Hemp CBD gummies. They help me slow down at the end of the day and actually relax instead of just collapsing.
And they taste pretty good, too.
They really do. I like the watermelon and peach flavors so much, and they only use the flower of the hemp plant, so you're getting the purest, most potent CBD without any fillers or junk.
Plus, they're third-party lab-tested and USDA organic, which is reassuring.
Right now, Crimes of the Centuries listeners can save 30% on their first order. Just head to cornbreadhemp.com/COTC and use code COTC at checkout.
That's cornbreadhemp.com/COTC. Use code COTC.
A.P. Crittenden was one of the famous Kentucky Crittendens, a family that had fought in the American Revolution alongside George Washington and included A.P.'s Uncle John, who served in the Kentucky legislature and as its governor, in the U.S. House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, and twice as Attorney General of the United States. There's a Kentucky county that was named in his honor. Uncle John, a slaveholder who at the time was still considered a true statesman, was a man who believed that anything could be achieved through compromise. He fought hard to make sure the Union did not fail, even crafting a complex piece of legislation in 1860 to do just that. It called for 6 constitutional amendments and a handful of congressional resolutions so everybody could be happy. Needless to say, it failed when President Abraham Lincoln called for his party to reject it outright. Still, my point is that AP was a well-connected young man with all reasonable expectation for a grand future in this country. In the years before the Civil War, his people had direct contact with the likes of President Andrew Jackson, who most historians say was the reason young AP got into West Point. A classmate and friend of AP's in 1834, 35, and 36, during his college years, was a young man named William Tecumseh Sherman. 2 decades later, Sherman would go on as a Union general to ravage AP's beloved South with his scorched earth policy as he marched from Atlanta to the sea in November 1864. The Crittenden family's friendship with Jackson was likely also the reason AP was invited to return to West Point after he was tossed out for some youthful mischief. He married Clara Churchill Jones in 1838 when he was 22 and she was 18. Also born in the Commonwealth, she moved with her family to Richmond, Virginia when she was young. As the daughter of a preacher, she was largely sheltered from the hardships of life. She became a Richmond debutante, whose job it was to simply be genteel and to believe in the rightness of the ways of the South. That meant that when she said, "I do," she accepted that her father did not control her life anymore. Instead, that job was handed directly to her new husband. His decisions about her and their life together would reflect what was best for her and whatever family God chose to bless them with. It was a family that would grow to be large and expensive. What's important to know about Clara is that she lived, for most of her marriage, as a traditional wife in Victorian-era America, knowing little about the intricacies of their financial well-being or lack thereof. Oh, she knew when they had money and, more often in her case, when they didn't. But she was tasked with running the household and making do with what her husband said she would make do with. In her case, it also meant she withstood his long absences and his wanderlust, often complaining in letters to him of her loneliness and hardship. She did this, knowing full well that she had almost zero say in where her husband decided they would move and how they would live once they got there. So when, a year after they were wed, he told his teenage bride to pack up her things because they were going to the new Republic of Texas, which had liberated itself from Mexico only 2 years earlier, she did just that. They landed in Brazoria County, a swampy, low-lying Gulf Coast region under which, in about a century in the future, oil would be discovered. But when they were there, it was not a place to get rich. It was hot, humid, and still raw frontier land, far from fortune. In 1840, only a few years before AP and Clara passed through, the region had been rattled by the Great Comanche Raid, the largest Native American raid ever launched against white settlements in what is now the United States. Led by Buffalo Hump and his followers, more than 400 Comanche warriors swept through south-central Texas, attacking and burning towns like Victoria and Linville along the Gulf Coast. Clara had expressed concern to her new husband about the dangers, which also included Mexican raids that still occasionally occurred there, as there were some banditos who had not exactly read the latest news of their 1836 ousting, though it may not have been as foreign to Clara as she feared. Here's Dr. Don Frazier, president of the McWhiney History Education Group and history professor at McMurray University in Abilene, talking about those who immigrated to Texas during this time.
From Waco south and certainly to the east and into South Texas, Texas is really about being from the deep south. And that really starts to shape that culture in that part of the state. Now, we think of Texans as being frontiersmen. Well, they're not really the same kind of frontiersmen as Texians were in the 1820s. Instead, these people are advancing the cotton frontier. So who's really running things? That would be the women. The women run the household. The women really direct how society is going to be woven together. Well, as Southerners, they were especially susceptible to the idea of the cult of true womanhood. A Texas woman was expected to be both a homemaker and a mother, pious and pure, strong and hardworking, docile and submissive. As the old saying goes, in the 1850s, Texas was heaven for men and dogs and hell for women and horses.
It was there that Clara took her infant child and began to bear more. It was where AP read the law, passed the bar, set up practice, and yearned for more status, more money. Truth was, even later, when he was better at making money, he was never very good at keeping money, what with his ever-enlarging family and his being accustomed to the finer things in life, plus his pendant for adventure. In Texas, the Crittendens struggled to make ends meet as their family grew at the rate of about a child a year. Their debt grew with them, and AP saw little way to get out from under that burden. The reality did not meet either of their expectations for wedded bliss. In Gary Crisp's book, Trespassers at the Golden Gate, a true account of love, murder, and madness in Gilded-Age San Francisco, the author notes that, quote, AP and Clara had their share of marital difficulties. By his admission, he could be surly and impatient with her, while she was not above complaining ceaselessly about the discomforts of her frugal and Spartan life on the prairie. End quote. They were not, of course, the only Americans who saw potential prosperity when they had looked toward the Pacific in the 1840s. The American West was opening up with opportunities for those who knew and understood hard work to own land and get a piece of the dream. They could farm it. Or, when gold was discovered in early 1848 at the base of California's Sierra Nevada mountains in the crystal blue water of the American River, they could mine it. Those without capital could pan it. The allure of fortune eluded almost no one. So when AP heard of the discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill, he told Clara they'd go west too. Correction, he would go, establish himself. Then he would send for Clara and the family. That could take a while, but surely she understood. In April of 1849, then, AP headed off, promising to write, which he did, though without mail service, it was an iffy business that his letters would arrive. Messages going the other way, from her to him, were even less likely to reach their destination. But he was no quitter, braving the hard and withering heat of the trails of sun-parched Texas and parts of Mexico, only to reach an equally unwelcoming Arizona before pressing on to the tiny burg known as Los Angeles, which was little better than the deserts he'd already traversed. Not that it wasn't beautiful at times. Oh, it could be. But even the beauty was dangerous. A traveling companion had been swept away when the small group had dared to cross the raging Colorado River. Along the way, AP traveled with assorted others that joined for a while. That included some friendly, or at times not friendly, Native Americans and, for a time, John Woodhouse Audubon, whose father was famed ornithologist John James Audubon, author of The Birds of America, the iconic collection of hand-colored engravings. Every letter sent between them was cherished, and in them, AP and Clara wrote of their ardency for one another. AP often said that this whole thing was a mistake, then waxed on about his regret that he had not lived up to his promise of providing her with a better life. One of his letters said as much, quote, "The greatest source of misery to me, the cause of unceasing annoyance, has been the want of means to render you all comfortable. If I had been wealthy, or at least unembarrassed by being deeply in debt, I should have been a very different character," end quote. The trip to California took 6 months, with AP sometimes traveling by wagon, sometimes by horseback, and sometimes on foot. Once in the Pueblo de Los Angeles, he was out of cash, but he still became enamored by it all and wrote Clara that he was sure that this was where their destiny turned. It was 1850. He borrowed money from an old pal he'd met up with and leaned into his legal training and on his good contacts back east. Figuring it was a free ticket north by schooner, he got himself elected to be part of the first session of the California legislature, as the state had just been admitted to the Union. He was no charlatan. He represented those who voted for him, authoring the legislation that incorporated the city of Los Angeles and chairing the judiciary committees when they met in San Jose, the state's first capital, which meant the ship bringing him north from his home in Los Angeles berthed in San Francisco, and what he saw was magic. The city was at the height of the California gold rush. AP was dazzled. A man could make his name here, his fortune here, his life here. All he had to do was get out of his own way. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by ButcherBox. With me starting to teach again next month, our schedule's about to get a whole lot tighter, meaning dinner time needs to be easy without being boring.
That's where ButcherBox comes in. It's been a game changer for planning meals without those frantic last-minute grocery runs.
We've gotten everything from their free-range organic chicken to pork ribs, and the quality is fantastic. The chicken we grilled last time was perfect.
And I love that it comes right to the door. No mystery meat, no sketchy sourcing. All ButcherBox proteins are sourced from partners who meet strict animal welfare and sustainability standards. That means no antibiotics or added hormones, ever.
You can choose a curated box like we did, or customize it completely to fit what you actually want to cook. Whether you're feeding a family or just trying to eat well on a schedule, it's a huge help.
Plus, every box ships free, always, and includes member-only perks like recipe inspiration, tips, and exclusive deals to help you make the most of every meal.
Right now, ButcherBox is offering our listeners $20 off their first box and free protein for a year.
Go to butcherbox.com/COTC to get this limited time offer and free shipping always.
That's butcherbox.com/COTC. Don't forget to use our link so they know we sent you. A few people got rich off the gold in them thar California hills, but not everybody. More made money off the miners and the world they created around them. That included all those who provided housing and food and clothing. I'm thinking Levi Strauss here, and all the entertainment their gold dust could buy. In a letter to Clara, AP wrote, quote, "It was a noisy, drinking, gambling place," end quote, mentioning in later missives the horde of sex workers who did well in the established brothels in town. But was it fit for families with children? Where were the schools, the churches? This would not do, he told his wife. He ostensibly wanted his family with him, but was not yet established enough in his mind, as he was still in serious debt, no thanks to his own willingness to gamble on risky and expensive ventures and a bad early series of fires in the city that burned down his home and business office. The fires, while devastating, had done San Francisco a favor, allowing the city to rebuild in an orderly manner, with the knowledge that it was a real city that needed citywide governance, a water distribution system, a police force, a fire department, a plan for growth. Plagued by crime and the growing pains of a rapidly changing environment, AP attended to business, which was good, and by the fall of 1851, he made the long trip by boat to Panama, then crossed the isthmus, partly by train, before boarding another ship bound for Richmond, Virginia, where his family waited for him. Clara had moved her brood there to be among her own people, and now here her husband was, ready to pack them up and start over. Again. They made it to the port of San Francisco by early 1852. It was the end of their 2.5 years of separation. It had taken time, but her husband had made good on his word that the family would be reunited and that they could start anew. She was 32, he was 36. It was all ahead of them. He had decided to put them all in a house in San Jose, which is just south of San Francisco, and closer to his legislative work during the 5 months a year the assembly was in session. He had settled in there before bringing his family, and now, duly elected to represent Santa Clara County, he was given credit for helping to establish that California would be ruled by the precepts of English common law. But then, just as everyone was getting cozy, the capital was moved to Sacramento. AP went away again, leaving Clara to deal with yet another pregnancy and a house that had little furniture and 6 other children, the oldest already on the cusp of teenagehood. Oh, joy. And she was not happy. She wanted to go back home. She was lonely, she told him. He prescribed a social life. That was in San Francisco, where he knew culture had been ambitiously imported, and the haves and have-nots were being sorted out. The people that mattered were aware of his legal prowess and liked him. Meanwhile, the wives of the city's most prominent men stayed busy civilizing the place, scrubbing it clean of evil, unchristian behavior. It was expected that women bloom where they were planted. Clara did her best. The Crittendens were invited to all the right parties, and things seemed to be falling into place. While Clara tried to find her footing in polite San Francisco society, another young woman across the continent was beginning a far more turbulent journey into adulthood. Sometime in 1854, 16-year-old Laura Hunt bowed to the will of her father, who saw a chance for his daughter to nab a wealthy older man and, perhaps, save the family from the poorhouse. Born in small-town Mississippi, Laura was steeped in the glories and supposed virtues of the South, but she was more rebel than belle. By the time the family moved to New Orleans, she was ready to be freed from her father's strictures. The wealthy older man her father had lined up was William H. Stone. Despite his fortune, he turned out to be an abusive drunk who accused his young wife of dallying with another man. She wasn't going to put up with the drinking or the violence. As luck would have it, Stone decided he needed to be rid of her as much as she needed to be rid of him. 6 months into the marriage, he offered her $3,000 to leave town. Laura took the cash, but stayed put. She had a life there. Before the whole mess could be sorted out, Mr. Stone drew his last breath, said to be the victim of cholera and a lifetime of alcohol. Some weren't convinced he hadn't been helped along, but nothing came of it. Laura moved on to marry Thomas Grayson, also an older man who was also an abusive alcoholic. From a documentary by Briefcase.
Within 6 months of getting married, Laura had had enough and started divorce proceedings. Along with her mother, she left Mississippi and set up home in California, settling in San Francisco.
This set things up so he could divorce her on the grounds of abandonment. This sort of unwomanly behavior did not concern Laura. She had her own mind, which ruffled a good many feathers. As Gary Chris notes, quote, according to the mores of the day, a wife was duty-bound to honor her marriage vows no matter what, end quote. This was, after all, a time in which Godey's Ladies' Book was a popular magazine, and it preached that woman's greatest commandment was, quote, to suffer and to be silent under suffering, end quote. Gross. Anyway, at just 19 years old, Laura Fair was ready to move on. Her brother joined her and her mother in San Francisco, which was undergoing a bit of a downturn after the boom years of the early 1850s. Laura was struggling to find a way out of her economic misfortunes and considered opening a boarding house. 2 attempts to do so in San Francisco failed, so the family moved to the town of Shasta, where things went better for Laura. A noted blonde, blue-eyed beauty, she was soon scooped up by West Point-educated former Army Colonel W.B. Fair, a former sheriff. They moved together to San Francisco, but the relationship was anything but stable. The marriage was stormy, marked by constant conflict, especially over issues of control and power. Tensions continued to build until, in December 1861, Fair died by suicide. The reasons were never made entirely clear, but by all accounts, it was the tragic end to a deeply troubled union. Laura had hoped the marriage would bring her respectability, or at least some stability, but Fair turned out to be more talk than truth. He had lied about his sterling credentials. He didn't come from money, didn't graduate from West Point, and was never officially commissioned as a colonel in the U.S. Army. He had passed the bar, sure.
But life in San Francisco was not quite as easy as he had imagined. He found it hard to establish his practice. His income diminished, and it became increasingly more difficult to provide for his family. William Fair committed suicide in December 1861.
Laura's bad luck had held. Some historians suggest she blamed herself for Fair's death. By this point, she was convinced she had a knack for picking the wrong men and for expecting too much from them. Once again, she was out of money and out of ideas. So she took her newborn daughter, along with her mother and brother, and headed back east to Virginia, though it was hardly a return to safety. She had stepped into the chaos of the Civil War. There were rumors that Laura got directly involved in the war effort, not just with words, but with weapons. Some accounts claim she ventured into contested border areas and even fired on the Union soldiers who came too close. No one was seriously hurt, but the stories painted her as fiercely loyal to the Southern cause, bold, defiant, and unafraid to take matters into her own hands. It's unclear why, but the family soon hightailed it back to San Francisco, where things were anything but quiet. That's because, by now, on the eastern side of the Sierras, across the same mountains where gold had once sparked a frenzy, silver had been found. Located in the Utah Territory in 1859, nestled deep inside the mountains of the Virginia Range that would soon belong to Nevada, the silver there was embedded not in veins, but in discrete masses that were often found to be hundreds of feet thick.
This was the first major discovery of silver ore in the United States and sparked a silver rush of prospectors to the area, all trying to stake their claims.
It would forever after be referred to as the Comstock Lode, the richest ever silver mine in America, named after the Canadian prospector Henry Comstock, who, in a move that now seems almost mythic in its short-sightedness, sold off his interest in it before it turned a profit. Over its lifespan, which ran until 1953, the Comstock Lode produced around 7 million tons of high-grade ore, yielding more than 192 million troy ounces of silver and over 6 million troy ounces of gold. And because I cannot, and will not, do that kind of math, I'll take the London Bullion Market Association's word for it that haul would be worth about $17 billion today. Other sources put the value even higher, some as high as $1 trillion, if you count its impact on national finance and westward expansion. So yeah, a lot. Life-changing for people and for the region they lived in. The town of Virginia City, Nevada was soon awash in money, jobs, and rampant elation. San Francisco was in for a second renaissance, and Laura Fair finally got herself a boarding house. She named it Tahoe House, that brought in boarders and their fresh silver and their competing silver claims. They would need good lawyers. So, A.P. Crittenden came to town, took a suite of rooms at the Tahoe House, telling the beautiful landlady there that he was, sadly, a widower. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Hiya Health. With a kiddo heading into 6th grade, I've been trying to set up good habits before the school year starts, especially with what's going into their body.
Yeah, because most kids' vitamins, total candy. Sugar, gummy junk, and things you can't pronounce.
That's why I switched to Hiya. It's a chewable vitamin with 0 sugar and no gummy additives, but Hunt actually likes the flavor. Hiya fills in the gaps with 15 essential vitamins and minerals, plus a blend of 12 organic fruits and veggies.
And you know, every batch is third-party tested, so you're not just taking their word for it.
And are you tired of battling with your kids to eat their greens? Hiya now has Kids Daily Greens plus superfoods, a chocolate-flavored greens powder designed specifically for kids, packed with 55 plus whole food ingredients to support brain power, development, and digestion. Just scoop, shake, and sip with milk or any non-dairy beverage for a delicious and nutritious boost your kids will actually enjoy.
We've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/COTC. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/COTC to get your kids full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults.
In a Q&A with Joe Pompeo in March for his A Little History newsletter, author Gary Christ explained that one of AP's daughters had collected the letters the family had written to one another. They were found in the 1980s in a Brooklyn warehouse. And because of the abundance of letters that passed between AP and Clara and AP and Laura, some of which were shared in the later trials, Chris could compare the gentleman's words to his wife against those written at the same time he was wooing Laura. Chris told Pompeo, quote, "I could see how audaciously he was lying to both of them. He would tell one of them one thing and one of them the other, and neither one of them was true," end quote. I won't enumerate the comings and goings of this trio as they managed their lives, separately and occasionally together, in the ensuing 7 years. Chris does a terrific job of giving chapter and verse of the ardent affair and the husband who so completely denied the affair that he had Clara and Laura dine with him in public in San Francisco just to prove the rumor mongers wrong. But here's what you need to know. Clara wanted to believe him, and Laura told again and again that he was doing his best to earn enough money to finally divorce his wife, always bought the excuse that now just wasn't the right time. There was even talk of AP and Laura going to Indiana to live for a while, as, apparently, the divorce laws there were something like an early version of no fault, so that could save Laura any public scandal. Laura was not up for embarrassment. She wanted the dignity that was accorded Clara in the new world of San Francisco society, the kind that came with proper invitations to the best dinners and proper genuflection for her good works. Now, the affair, which was not especially well hidden, cost AP, a man, nothing in terms of how the upper crust viewed him. We're talking bankers, rail barons, shipping magnates, all the hoity-toity people. But divorcing his wife would have cost him.
He was very well aware that abandoning his wife and children to become the fourth husband of Laura Fair would be very much frowned upon by the prominent social circle he operated in, and would only have a detrimental effect on his business.
He could have just, let Laura go. Instead, he chose to live a double life, writing to Clara as the devoted, overworked husband, endlessly apologizing for being away so often, always just one big case away from setting her up in peace and comfort, while at the same time pouring his soul out to Laura, swearing she was his one true love and that his marriage was long over in all but name. He told each woman that she was the center of his world, then delayed, deflected, and deceived to keep both stories spinning. And when one would call him out on his bullshit, he'd gaslight them, saying they were being delusional and trusting the rumor mill instead of him. Now, the well-known affair didn't hurt his reputation, but it most certainly affected how all of San Francisco viewed Laura, not fit to be in the good graces of the moral and upstanding. Still, they remained an item, even as he remained married, living sometimes with one and sometimes with the other, lying about his absences. Always, he would tell Laura to give him 6 more months to get his house in order. The 6 months would come and go, and he was still not free. Granted, he had sons who had gone off to university and then to war during that time to be concerned with. He had daughters that needed respectability in order to themselves marry well. He had younger children who still needed his care. Laura would fire back that she needed respectability, and so did her daughters. To relieve her own debts, she made a brief and well-reviewed appearance on the San Francisco stage. She fled to Cuba, then to New York. She even went so far as to dally with other men who wanted to marry her. In fact, she did marry another man, one Jeffrey Snyder, whom AP promptly tried to buy off. When that didn't work, he threatened to kill them both. Another divorce followed. And so it went. AP was still, in his words, not solvent enough to leave his family, even as he handled a steady stream of lucrative mining claim cases. He even found time to gamble his own money on various mining ventures that never quite, pardon the pun, panned out. So he carried on with his increasingly anxious, increasingly angry mistress, while his family remained away. Clara, for her part, simply waited for him to get over it. AP was adamant that he wouldn't leave Clara until he could leave her well off. She was the mother of his children, after all. Surely Laura could understand that. In 1868, Laura returned to San Francisco. Clara, determined to confront her, went to see her. Laura told her plainly she had come back because AP could do nothing without her. Clara begged her to leave him alone. Laura said she would, as soon as AP told her to. But Clara knew he never would. Enraged now, Clara told her she would rather see AP die at her feet than live to see him marry Laura. So what came to pass on the late afternoon of November 3rd, 1870, was perhaps inevitable. AP's 14-year-old son, Parker, saw the black-veiled woman as she moved quickly toward the family. They were all sitting on a bench aboard the ferry. His father had been so glad to see them, now seated between Clara and their 16-year-old daughter. They were aboard the El Capitan, preparing to shove off across the bay. They'd be home in less than an hour. But Laura had already seen what she had come to see. Here's Pam Ward again, reading from Carol Haber's book.
Rather than appearing despondent and distant, he seemed truly pleased to be basking once again in the embrace of his respectable middle-class family.
The woman was unknown to Parker, AP's teenage son. When she got in front of his father, she pulled out a pistol, yelled, "You ruined me," then shot him in the chest, dropped the gun, turned, and ran. It was all chaos then. Parker chased after her, as did a captain from the harbor police who had been on board. They found her in the wheelhouse. When they approached her, she said, quote, "I do not deny it. I did it. He ruined me and my child," end quote. Later, when she was given a glass of water to help calm herself, she bit the rim so hard the glass broke. A.P. Crittenden was mortally wounded. He died 2 days later. On the day of his funeral, the San Francisco newspapers reported that federal, state, and local courts adjourned to allow the legal community to mourn. It was said to be the largest funeral in the city's history up to that point. AP's lying had come to an end. But what followed next would prove to be as messy as the past 7 years had been. Every so often, we here at Crimes of the Centuries like to share other true crime podcasts we think you'll love. This week, I want to tell you about a podcast called Crime Salad.
Yeah, this one's hosted by a husband and wife team, Ashley and Ricky. Ashley tells the story, Ricky reacts, and together they bring you deep, well-researched cases while always amplifying victims' voices and advocating for justice.
One of their recent episodes is called The Fire That Freed Him, Kimberly Sullivan's House of Horror. It tells the story of a 32-year-old man who spent decades locked in a room in Waterbury, Connecticut. Starved, abused, and weighing only 68 pounds, he finally set a fire using just a lighter, paper, and hand sanitizer, risking his life to escape.
That fire led to a desperate rescue, revealing the horror he'd been living through. His stepmother, Kimberly Sullivan, is charged with imprisoning him for over 20 years, though she denies it.
It's a heartbreaking story, but now his voice is being heard, and that's what Crime Salad does so well. They uncover truth, tell stories with compassion, and make sure victims aren't forgotten.
So check out the full episode, The Fire That Freed Him, Kimberly Sullivan's House of Horror, and other powerful cases by searching Crime Salad wherever you get your podcasts.
Laura Fair, for her part, steadfastly told police and reporters that she remembered nothing of the killing or even how she got from the Oakland dock onto the ferry. She did remember one voice from that day. It was the most annoying sound, she said. It was Clara talking. The news of the murder of Alexander Parker Crittenden traveled quickly around the country now that telegraph lines had been put in to connect the rest of the country to the west. The Transcontinental Railroad had been completed just a year before. News had reached the first-wave feminists back east. A woman in Laura's position, that is, one operating in a man's world without legal power or social protection, had been pushed to the edge, forced to live in an untenable position, they said. They rallied behind her. It was no surprise then that court was packed for each of the 30 days of the trial as the jury, composed entirely of men, was asked to weigh her guilt. The trial became such a sensation that court reporters Marsh and Osborne published a book immediately after it was over. That was entitled The Official Report of the Trial of Laura D. Fair for the Murder of Alex P. Crittenden. Here's an excerpt from the preface to the report. Quote, "This case stands alone, unparalleled in many of its features by any case known to the criminal jurisprudence of this or any other country by reason of the personal prominence, the social standing, the high character and position of the deceased, Mr. Alexander Parker Crittenden, on the one hand, and the notoriety, intelligence, accomplishments, and great personal beauty of the accused, Mrs. Laura D. Fair, on the other, the known relations existing between them, and the open and bold manner in which she committed this homicide, the peculiar defense interposed, and the length of time consumed in the trial, the jury having been kept together and carefully excluded from contact with the outside world for the period of 30 days. End quote. The report continued that when the trial began in early spring of 1871, it, quote, quickly became a national sensation, calling into question fundamental assumptions about the sanctity of the family, the value of reputation, and the range of acceptable expressions of femininity, end quote. In an essay published by Georgetown University Law School, legal scholar Holly Streeter wrote about the unusual defense mounted by Fair's attorneys. The defense team used the notion of a particular kind of malady, a female malady, to try to exonerate her. Their theory was that she suffered maniacal attacks due to delayed menstruation during the year before the killing and was unconscious when she pulled the trigger. In modern terms, they claimed she was temporarily insane due to dysmenorrhea, the intense menstrual pain that can cause not just physical, but psychological symptoms. It was true that Laura had a history of painful periods that often left her incapacitated. The defense had solicited the testimony of 3 doctors and a nurse to testify that such maladies were common among women and that Ferry suffered severely from them. They argued that mental illness linked to menstruation could cause a woman to act on an irresistible impulse. The prosecution scoffed. On cross-examination, they got one of Ferry's own expert witnesses to admit that the same symptoms could also stem from, as they put it, sexual excess. In doing so, they painted women like Ferry as dangerous sexual creatures, quote, subjected to control only by moral constraints, end quote. To the state, Laura was loose. Clara was selfless. When the defense said that Laura had been driven mad by Crittenden's endless promises, the state countered that she was nothing more than a seductress, one who, as they put it, would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. It wasn't just Laura on trial. Morality and all its competing definitions took the stand as well. The suffragist, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, is said to have showed up for the trial, argued publicly that the whole thing was a system of justice made by men, for men, and that, in having an all-male jury, Laura was hardly being judged by a jury of her peers. But they were equally disdainful of the defense. Streeter wrote that they bristled at the concept of female hysteria and menstruation being used to deny women their rights and keep them under the control of men. In this way, Streeter wrote, the trial was framed by the lawyers, the suffragists, and the press in entirely gendered terms. How so the media? Well, Streeter felt that San Francisco's newspapers, including the Chronicle and the Examiner, quote, criticized Ferry as a man-hungry murderess who had seduced an upright citizen and destroyed his family. The papers played to the Victorian notion that the passion of women was potentially dangerous and destructive, end quote. Laura suffered, historians say, because she had been a woman who dared to step out of her appointed role. She had run a business, she'd invested in mines, that was at AP's urging, by the way, and she'd been married 4 times and divorced 3. All true, but what Laura's legal counsel had banked on, the insanity defense, would have been a tough sell in nearly any case in 1871. The strategy was brand new in American legal history. Here's how Gary Christ explained it on the Nerds with Words podcast.
The first successful use of the temporary insanity plea was in 1859. This guy called Dan Sickles, who was a U.S. congressman from New York. He shot his wife's lover, who happened to be Francis Scott Key's son, and he got off on a temporary insanity plea based on something called the unwritten law, which was that certain crimes of passion are excusable, especially a man defending his wife who had been debauched or something like that. And so juries were very sympathetic to this.
You might remember the Sickles case from season 1. Additionally, in 1865, a young woman named Mary Harris, raised in small-town Iowa, shot and killed the man who had courted her since she was 12 after finding out he was engaged to someone else. 6 doctors testified to her history of painful menstruation and how it might have affected her mental state. She was found not guilty. Laura Ferry was not so lucky. On April 26, 1871, after only a few minutes of deliberation, the all-male jury found her guilty of murder. Briefcase again.
There was a mixed reaction in San Francisco, but the majority of people thought the verdict was just.
She was sentenced to be hanged on July 28th, the first woman ever sentenced to execution in the state of California. But on July 11th, her luck changed. The California Supreme Court granted a stay of execution and, later, a new trial. This time, she was acquitted. Christ again.
The excuse was dysmenorrhea, which is basically irregular menstruation. So they reduced it in the way that Victorian doctors often did to some gynecological issue that made her lose her mind.
The media lost its collective mind. California editors fretted that the world would now know that the state was a lawless, morality-free wasteland. Out-of-state editors agreed. My favorite comment came from the Dallas Weekly Herald. Quote, "The jury in her case were not even hung, though they ought to be." End quote. Laura Fair, adulteress, killer, walked free. In February 2016, author and historian R.E. Fulton wrote about what happened next. From Nursing Cleo, a peer-reviewed collaborative blog project that connects historical scholarship to present-day issues in gender and medicine, quote, "In fact, the Harris case became the precedent for a developing theory of female crime. Later in the century, the trials of Fanny Hyde, Josephine McCarty, and other women accused of violent crimes showed that juries could be swayed by medical evidence suggesting that uterine excitement could equate to mental derangement, resulting in a moment of insanity during which the worst could happen without the woman's conscious intent." End quote. The tactic has a checkered history when it comes to exonerating women in court. That said, it's worth noting that in 1991, the Baltimore Sun reported on what was called America's first successful criminal defense based on premenstrual syndrome, when a Virginia surgeon was acquitted on drunken driving charges based on medical evidence that PMS had affected her behavior. But that was 100 years in the future and is still highly debatable in legal and medical circles. These days, such arguments are more likely to be treated as mitigating factors in sentencing rather than a full defense. But, as you know, juries can be cantankerous or generous, or both. Laura Fair chose to stay in San Francisco. She remained her own cantankerous, generous self, giving public lectures about her persecution for a modest entry fee. She made money off some mining investments that AP had once suggested, but she had also learned from AP how to spend money she didn't have. She died in 1919. She was 82. Clara, who had stayed in San Francisco as well, died 38 years before, in 1881, at the age of 61. There's no record of whether the two women ever crossed paths again. The Crittendens family's letters, the ones that helped reveal the full scope of the lies and longing between AP, Clara, and Laura, are now archived at the University of Michigan. To research this case, journalist Amy Wilson read Trespassers at the Golden Gate, a true account of love, murder, and madness in Gilded-Age San Francisco by Gary Christ, and listened to Carol Haber's audiobook, The Trials of Laura Fair. She also consulted newspaper accounts from the time, along with excerpts from the trial transcripts available online. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab to hear not just exclusive content related to this show, but to also get access to several other shows on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this show was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Amanda Rossman and Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and occasionally by my son, Hunt Van Ben Scoten. Other music comes from Soundstripe and Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com.